DIY and How Studios presents Deeper Digs in Rock, part of the Rock N Roll Archaeology project. Music, culture, technology, and rock and roll. Now, on with the show.
Hello, friends. Welcome. I'm Christian Swain. Yeah, that's me, and I am the Rock N Roll Archaeologist. This is Deeper Digs in Rock on Pantheon Media, and now in the Rock N Roll Archaeology feed. Let me do just a little setting up here. We, and by that I mean the Rock N Roll Archaeology team, that's Jerry Danielson, Richard Evans, and yours truly, have decided to revive our long-dormant interview show, Deeper Digs. So going forward, it will be a part of our rock and roll menu. Expect one of these every so often, along with new chapters of Rock and Roll Archaeology. That's the main show. And the R&RA shorts that seem to have caught on. Those do almost as well as the main show now, so thank you very much for that. This was a pretty straightforward interview show. I sit down, sometimes in person, sometimes virtually, with a guest and pick their brains for a bit. We have booked the occasional rock star or celebrity, but honestly, we're more interested in engaging with academics and journalists as our main guests here. And by the way, that's consistent with how we do rock and roll archaeology. But after today, we are going to add a new wrinkle to the concept. We are going to do this live. And we're going to bring on a panel of folks to discuss a particular topic of interest to all of us. And we won't just have these academics, journalists, or the occasional rock star talking. No, we will be inviting you up on stage to interact with us. We will be utilizing a new app that has the ability to revolutionize the podcasting world. It's called Gigaverse, and soon we will all be meeting over there. We look forward to actually meeting some of you. We will let our friends know when we're up and running on the Gigaverse, so hold tight, but it's going to be a lot of fun for all of us. Okay, that's the future. Let's talk about today's show. So, speaking of journalists, we have got an interview with one of the best for you. For 35 years, Robert Hilburn was the main pop and rock writer for the Los Angeles Times. He's got 4 terrific books out now, and we have cited him many times in our show. Notably, Robert's new biography of Randy Newman, it's titled A Few Words in Defense of Our Country, and it came out in late 2024, was the main source for our most recent R&RA short. We hoped to interview Robert about the Randy Newman book, but we couldn't get the schedules to sync up. Robert offered us a rain check, and we will definitely take him up on that, so stay tuned. So we're going to do the next best thing. We're repurposing one of our better efforts on Deeper Digs, our June 2018 interview with Robert Hilburn. At that time, Robert's biography of Paul Simon was out, so we discussed that. But just like Marty DeBerge and This Is Spinal Tap, we got more, a whole lot more. So let's get into it. Friends, this is Deeper Digs in Rock, and we're about to hear from a great rock journalist, Mr. Robert Hilburn.
And the sun was beating on the soldiers by the side of the road. There was a bright light, a shattering of shop windows. The bomb in the baby carriage was wired to the radio. These are the days of miracle and wonder. This is the long distance call. The way the camera follows us
Well, hello, Robert Hilburn. Welcome to Deeper Digs in Rock. Let me get the diggers just a little on you, and then we'll jump into our big topic today, Paul Simon. So you're first and foremost known as the pop music critic for the Los Angeles Times, and after 35 years, you leave at the start of the digital disruption in the news business. So my first question is, was it prescient or was it just time to go?
That was the hardest decision, Christian, I made in my life. I loved being at the LA Times. I got to go everywhere. U2 in Dublin, Bob Dylan in Israel, Paul Simon in Zimbabwe, Elton John in Moscow. Every year for 30 years, I went to London for a week looking for new acts and so forth. It was a fantastic time. I did maybe a dozen interviews with Dylan. I interviewed everybody important, Springsteen over and over again, because my goal was always to write about artists who I thought would still be worth knowing about 10 and 20 years from now. I didn't care who was number one in the charts. I wanted to write about the significant artists of our time. And you can imagine, I got letters by the ton. Another story about Springsteen. Oh, my God. I know Bob Dylan's great, but we need to talk to him again. All right. So I loved that job. But things, as you hint at, things were changing, okay? And I realized slowly that this wasn't the same job anymore. The digital internet impact made some people at the paper more excited about you finding out that Britney Spears missed her plane at the airport than if you had found the new Bob Dylan. Plus, there weren't the new Bob Dylans coming up anymore.
Yeah.
Music changed. American Idol, I always point my finger at American Idol because that took away the importance of songwriter. It was now a vocalist, okay? And people were responding to that. Then all these other TV shows come along. There's no way Bob Dylan, Paul Simon, John Lennon could have ever competed on those shows because they were unique talents. They weren't fitting into the mode of what audiences expected. So I said, now look, if I stay here, I'm going to end up writing about interviewing the runners-up on American Idol. What's your philosophy of music? There is no philosophy. There is no philosophy. At least that I cared about. I cared about songwriters and social commentary and moving forward. So I said, I've got to leave and I want to write books.
Yeah. So,
that's a long...
that's a great answer.
Okay.
We completely agree.
Okay.
So in 1985, you published Springsteen, Springsteen bio, Springsteen, right at the apogee of his cultural relevance. Why not another book until 2010 when you wrote Cornflakes with John Lennon and Other Tales from a Rock and Roll Life?
Part of it was confidence, I think. Just because you can be a critic at a newspaper doesn't mean you can write a 300-page book, okay? So I said, look, I've got the best job in the world. I've seen so many people try other things. Paul Simon trying a movie, and you say, I don't want to foul up on something. And Springsteen, that book came by accident. Jan Winter of Rolling Stone phoned me one day and said, we're doing a series of books on, I think they did the Beatles, Sinatra, Elvis, and we're going to do one on David Bowie. And I said, really, that's interesting, but why don't you do one on Bruce Springsteen? It seemed to me this guy was
the biggest star in the world at the time.
And Jan said, well, let me think about it. 2 weeks later, Born in the USA came out. Explodes. I get a phone call back from Jan Winter, and
it's obvious.
He does not mention the first phone call. He says, "How about
it's his idea now.
How about doing a book on Bruce Springsteen?" But I only had 6 weeks to do it. I mainly had to go from what I knew about him. I did one interview with him, so that was the first book. But at least it broke the ice.
Right.
But I still never considered it a real book, so I kept waiting and waiting. Plus, I didn't have any time. I was always spending time at the paper trying to find a great new actor, writing about this and that. But by the time 2005 came along, okay, I want to write about artists. Who do I want to write about? That's the big decision. But I just took the same philosophy I had at the Times. People who would be you still want to know about 10, 20 years ago, although I put 50 years as the time.
Right. Now it's time to look like that.
And there's not a lot of people, when you think about that, that fit that. Plus, you've got to have an interest in the artist. You don't want to spend 3 years writing about somebody that you don't care about, okay? So it's got to be significant, somebody you care about, and somebody you think a large number of people care about, rather than trying to find a cult figure and, doing a book on that. I'd rather write about somebody that I think there's an audience for. And there were only like 7 people. And I don't want to ever mention that list who was in the 7 people, but Johnny Cash was one. And I had been with him at Folsom Prison when he did the Folsom Prison concert.
68, right?
68. That was amazing. I was just trying to get.
How did you get into?
Well, I was trying. Well, I wasn't in jail. I was just trying to.
That's an important fact to make sure we know.
Well, the funny thing is, Johnny Cash had done an earlier concert, I think 1960 maybe, at San Quentin. And Merle Haggard was actually in the prison. He wasn't on the show because they later met. And Merle says to John, "I was at San Quentin when you did that show." And John said, "I don't remember you being on the show." He says, "No, I was
one of the
I was
audience.
in the 3rd row. I was in the 3rd row."
Wow.
That was so. You got to have an interest in it. And I had been there. I was trying to get a job at the LA Times, as a matter of fact. And they said, "Well, do a story. Let's see what you can do." Right. And Columbia. I was the only music writer there because Columbia Records had tried to make a prison album with Cash before that, and he showed up stoned. They had to cancel it. So they didn't want to invite press to this thing because they were afraid the same thing might happen. But I knew a disc jockey who told me about the show, and Cash said it was okay to come, and that's how I kind of got in there and did the story.
All right. So you leave the Times, and the first book that you write is, as I said, Cornflakes with John Lennon and Other Tales from a Rock and Roll Life. So was this an attempt at ridding yourself the years of all these special stories that you had built up and kind of shedding the skin of a reporter and writing 500 to 800 words
No, in retrospect, that's a good answer. But I wanted to write a book. So I said, well, look, I'll do the first book about something I know. I don't have to, get the artist's estate or the artist. I don't have to do anything except write my book. Yeah. And I had all these stories that I wanted to tell about what rock and roll meant to me. And that just seemed like a natural beginning. It would give me a chance to explore writing, and it's something I knew intimately and that I wanted to say to people. So that way, it was kind of like a learning path or something.
Right. So you were like taking your own personal writing class to go, okay, now let's expand this out into a book form. Okay, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, the idea was
good.
The idea was to say what I thought was important in rock and what some of these artists were like away from the music. That was the two combinations. And I enjoyed it a lot. In time, I look back at it with more affection because at the time I thought it was easy, this and that. But I've gotten so much coming over the years by people who like those stories.
You chronicled many, many great moments in rock and roll. And I know I've read hundreds of your articles growing up here in Southern California.
And probably hated
some, yes. Disagreed with how you treated Rush, but,
Oh, no, I used to be vicious on things like that. And the reason is okay. I was trying to always divert people's attention to the great artists that I thought.
Yeah.
So if somebody else came up, I would say, look, don't waste your time, is what I'm saying to myself, on these guys. Don't waste your time on Three Dog Night or Rush or on and on and on. Listen to Springsteen, listen to Dylan, listen to Randy Newman. That was more my goal because I wanted to, again, document the great artists of the time.
Yeah. And let's see, you actually became friends with John Lennon.
Well, friends is a word. It's a word I feel uncomfortable. No, it's probably accurate, but I feel uncomfortable because as a critic, you've got to maintain a distance. You never become chummy enough where you call people.
Right.
Oh, John, did you just see this? Yeah. I never called John Lennon in my life. I never called Springsteen, never called Paul Simon. It's really the time you saw him was almost always when you're doing a story on him, and that was with John. But in John, I spent more time when he was living in L.A. in the 70s, just for 6 months.
The Lost Weekend.
Yeah, I spent. I saw him sometimes socially, but that's as close as I probably ever got to breaking the. I only see him when I'm doing an interview.
Yeah. So in 2013, you write what may now be the definitive book on one of the original pillars of rock and roll, Johnny Cash, The Life. How and why did you choose Cash as your first subject to focus on for an entire book?
Well, again, I was with him at the beginning. Yeah. I kind of kept track of him over the years. I saw the movie that was made, Walk the Line.
Yeah.
Which
with
was
Joaquin Phoenix,
was largely fiction. It's what June Carter wanted people to think. And I said, Johnny Cash is going to be remembered. there had been a bunch of books written on Cash. He's going to be remembered 50 years from now. I want to write a book about him, and I want to do it. I'm not a fan of most pop biographies. I just don't think they get very deep into the artistry particularly. I want to write a book about somebody, not that he's a celebrity, but that he's a statesman almost. So I read David McCullough, who wrote about presidents, Doris Kearns Goodwin's A. Scott Berg. And how did these people, serious writers, treat their subjects? And I wanted to take that tone writing about Cash. The stories you tell, what's in their life that's interesting.
Like a real historian.
Yeah.
Because that's what those folks are. They're actual
and also
historians.
I wanted to see what things in their life. They're not looking for every tabloid incident and spend 10 pages. No. They're trying to give you a sense of who they were and why they're important. That's the thing that's often missing. The artistry is why Johnny Cash is important. The artistry is why Paul Simon. If they didn't write those songs and record those songs, no one would care about them. So let me get deep into those songs. What's behind those songs? And that was what led me to Cash. I asked his managers, Christian, as a matter of fact, I said, how much of the Johnny Cash story's been told? He said maybe 20%. I said, wow. So that's what got me going.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit about your research. Guys like Nick Cohn, Lester Bangs, Robert Christgau. We love those guys. We love reading them. We use them as research in some of our shows. But your work seems a little bit more journalistic, for obvious reasons. Solid, backed up, and sourced. Can you talk a little bit about how you approach your research for a subject?
Well, first of all, when you mention those names, Nick Cohn, Christgau particularly, I'm intimidated. I always feel intimidated because those guys are great writers and stylists. I never consider myself a great writer and stylist, but they also put themselves into the story more. I never want to be in the story. I want to be, partially because of my reporting training. I was a reporter before I was a music critic, which is objectivity. You're not the story. The subject's the story.
Right.
So when I interview Bob Dylan or Paul Simon or Bono, all I'm doing, I'm trying to get as much out of them as true as what I feel is truthful and honest and illuminating as I can.
Not an easy job with some of those guys.
No. And I'm sitting here in the middle, and the audience is on the other side. It's like a high or a bridge. I went from Dylan to the reader. I'm not there. One of the things I really liked, a review I got of this book said it reads like a memoir.
Yeah,
that's
it does.
Perfect, see, because I'm trying to present his point of view.
This is Paul's official story. This is Paul Simon's official biography.
Well, no, but it's not really that. That's a misunderstanding. I asked Paul if he would cooperate, if he would talk to me. He's never talked to a biographer before, and he said yes, he'll talk to me and this and that. But it was always my control. He had no input over the content of the book.
Right.
So it's not like he's not approving it. It's not authorized in that sense. But he cooperated and let me talk to him. If there's things he doesn't like about the book, but it's my book, okay? But that was my goal, was to kind of be that bridge where I'm not. And someone mentioned it read like the memoir, and I thought that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make it feel like you're talking right to that person. You know?
Right.
But again, I'm not trying to overpraise that person or anything else. I'll criticize the music, but I try to present their own words so that a reader can hear them talking.
So through the Cash book, that was so well received. Yeah. You obviously got another fan, and that's Paul Simon. He's notoriously, as we just talked about, rejected allowing his story to be told. So how did that happen? How did you convince him to kind of pull back the kimono a little bit?
Well, I sit down. Remember, I had a list of 7 people initially, on my list of who to write about. One of them was Bob Dylan. Now, Bob Dylan you can't do a Bob Dylan biography until 4 or 5 years after his death, because he's not going to talk to you, and nobody around him is going to talk about it because he's got them all so intimidated. Okay.
Yeah, I've heard stories of don't even look at him.
Nobody's going to talk about him, and to my surprise, though, Christian, I found that I did the Johnny Cash story. It was 5 years after his death. And his family said, if you'd have come to us right after his death, we wouldn't have talked to you either. It takes time to get over that protection. So gradually Dylan's family and people around him will see it as history rather than protection. So I said, okay, he's off the list. And so Paul Simon now, because I love songwriting, okay? And I considered Joni Mitchell. I love Joni Mitchell. But the difference is nobody is like Simon has written, who is still writing in the 2000s with the same quality he had in the 60s. Everybody else has dropped off, maybe except Dylan. You can put a question mark. Some people disagree about that. But because I wanted to know the creative process, in a sense, I wanted to talk how artistry comes about, and equally important, how you protect it for all those years against fame.
Decades, yeah.
Fame can destroy your artistry. Wealth can destroy it. Marriage, divorce, drugs, fear of failure. And that's why McCartney drops off after a while. That's why Neil Young drops off after a while. That's why these artists, they're not doing as good a work now as they were doing before, because either they've run out of energy or they've let distraction. Elvis was the great example. He let fame destroy him, okay? So, and Simon saw that early, and he was always saying, the music's the most important thing. I've got to keep getting better. I can't try to be as good as I was in the life. I've got to get better than that. And that was, so that really the sub-theme of my book is artistry and how you protect it. You tell Simon's life, but what I was really trying to secretly get at was that other issue, which I think other songwriters can learn from that. You've got to be true to the music. You can't have 4 hits and think I know it all. Simon walks away from Simon and Garfunkel because
at the height of their career.
Yes, can you imagine how that is? And Clive Davis says, Paul, it's the worst mistake you've ever going to make. And he says, I don't care. I don't want to write anymore in that style. I'm burned out of it. If he'd have kept writing with Simon and Garfunkel, he would have burned out in the 70s too, and he would be doing like the Rolling Stones today, doing those old shows.
Yeah.
But he saw
putting
that
on the hits, right?
He wanted to learn more about music. He wanted to be inspired by music and keep going. And that's the dramatic, that's the most dramatic thing about him, is he just avoided all the temptations.
So you cite Mickey Mantle, Elvis, John F. Kennedy, and Lenny Bruce as Paul Simon's 4 great heroes. As I read the book, I kept coming back to one or more of them. It's like there's a little of each that make up Paul Simon. Is that fair? And if so, how do each of them play into the mind of Paul Simon?
Well, see, Elvis, of course, was probably first, and that's what I want to be. I want to be in rock and roll. I want to be in music. I want to have audiences come to see me and so forth. And then John F. Kennedy was the idea of the world. Here's a person who can inspire everybody in the country. That's a great thing. And there's so much empathy in Paul's music. That's one thing that separates it from Dylan, let's say, and most rock and rollers. Most rock and rollers are talking about rebellion, change, social change, attack almost.
Self-confidence, things like that.
But Paul puts those things, social change, in there, but it's always in the sense of empathy. One story, if I might jump ahead, if he says often, if you look at the first line of my song, it's always the most truthful line in the song. And take Bridge Over Troubled Water, which we all assume was him saying, being this wonderful guy saying, look, if you have a problem, come to me and I'll give you comfort. The first line is feeling weary, feeling small. He's breaking up with Simon and Garfunkel. He's isolated. He's unhappy. He's had all this success. He's unhappy. He says, I was weary. I'm 5'3". I'm small. He was looking for comfort. He wanted people to come and help him. See, but as a songwriter, you don't want to say that, so he just
flipped
turns.
it around.
But that's what I love about the book. See, I never had read that before. So I wanted to know more about these songs, and that's a perfect example of Paul. The empathy in it, and how his goal was not to protest, not to attack. It was the empathy, and you can see it through Graceland, all these songs. But in that process, he's talking about the country, American Tune, America, Mrs. Robinson, but he never does it in the sense of protest. He says the worst thing you can do in a song is listen to it and say, and the point is. He never wants to. It's almost
leave
like
it leave it up to the listener.
It's like writing the biography. You don't want to say, and the point is. You just want to tell.
Here's the story. You take it
decide,
for what you
decide.
want.
And I just got a great review, and he took what I said in the book, and he made his own thesis of what I was saying about Simon. His motivation, everything. I got attacked in one review saying, he never actually, like Freudian concept, why has Paul Simon kept going for all these years? I never kind of make some guess at it, because Paul doesn't know, his best friend from high school doesn't know, how former wife doesn't know. So how are
you going to know? Right.
Yeah, that's what I say. I might be right, I might be wrong. Right. But this guy read everything. I just want to put in everything I know about Paul Simon, and you decide as a reader. And this guy did that. It was a great review, because I'm not sure he's right or wrong, but it was at least he made that jump. you know?
Yeah. So we add those four heroes that you start off
I'm
with
sorry,
the book.
I did, yeah.
Definitely Elvis, John F. Kennedy, Mickey Mantle.
He loved baseball.
I think that some of the competitive nature of him comes from
he
that.
was on the he was 5'2". He was on the All-Star team in high school. He stole
home once.
Fantastic.
Right.
He has a thing in his office, a picture of that. A copy of the newspaper article from that day saying Simon steals home.
Right,
He loves baseball. He goes to games all the time. When I saw him at the Hollywood Bowl the other night, I walk in the dressing room after the show and he's got a baseball just throwing it up. He just loves baseball, and that's a great passion. Now, if we go to Lenny Bruce, he's got a great comic sense, Paul, and it frustrates him no end, Christian, that people don't pick up on the humor in his songs. During Simon and Garfunkel days, he said he was making a joke with.
Well, when you start off with Simon and Garfunkel, how do you wouldn't assume humor?
Well, that's right. He said
a big piece of it.
They were thinking.
So there's this cultivated image already of like the serious Paul Simon.
Yeah. And he hated that. In fact, he and Art one time were thinking of a title for the new record, and Paul said, so young and so unhappy. But see, when you get to me and Julio, look at that humor. And Duncan, look at Duncan. That's got a great humor. And it goes,
50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. Come on, that's a hilarious song.
But he's dead. It's deadpan. It's not hidden. It's not like he's pointing a finger to it. It's again letting the audience discover what it's in you. But that's what he wishes people would see the humor more.
I'm going to add a fifth hero, and that's his father, Lou
of course.
Simon. Can you talk a little bit about their relationship?
Yeah, the interesting thing about it is I interviewed Paul maybe 5 or 6 times at the Times, usually for an hour or 2 hours, and he was probably as articulate as anybody I ever interviewed. So I thought when he said
you knew that right away. He was quite an articulate.
He was great,
gentleman.
And so when I started interviewing him for the book, I thought it was going to be easy, I did a book on a Johnny Cash who was dead. Wow. This was going to be easy. He's like, I'm going to hold up an album, and he's going to tell me everything about the album. But it's like the first day he said, I don't care about that. I don't know why is it important? Which song I wrote first on the album? Why is all this stuff? And he would give him 2 or 3 word answers. It was, I'm thinking, what's going on here? And I realized he was in his recording studio. After about an hour, he said, come on, let's go listen to the new music. All those interviews, he was always talking about the new music, see? And when he gets to the new music, he's talking fine, but he doesn't, it's like Dylan, don't look back. He doesn't care.
He's always moving forward, right?
Plus, he's private. He doesn't that's why when he made records, he would make a record and then disappear. He wasn't like Neil Young and Tom Petty and Bruce Springsteen, who would invite you in the tour bus. You would get to know him. You have a persona. The listeners would identify with the image of the person. Paul was almost this unknown person who would just deliver this music every once in a while and then disappear. So I think that probably cost him commercially because you didn't identify with him in the same way you could identify with Petty's life or John Lennon's life and so forth. On the other hand, all that privacy, I think, helped protect the artistry because I think you suffer a little bit as an artist.
Did he pick some of that up from his dad?
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, his dad said, Paul, the only thing matters is the music. You've got to, you've got to keep getting better. If you stand still, you're going to go backwards. So he always knew, keep away from the fame, keep private, and keep making music, never thinking you've mastered it. That was what his father did. Never think you've mastered it.
Because that was basically his career in music was that sort of thing, right?
His father?
Yeah, his father.
Well, not really. That's a romantic way of looking at it. His father was basically, he had a couple of glamour jobs. He played in the orchestra at CBS. He had a radio.
Roseland Ballroom, I think, too.
He did the Roseland Ballroom, but all that's minor league stuff, really. He mainly did bar mitzvahs. He did weddings. He did things like that. He's spending as much time lining up the jobs as actually doing. So he had not really much success. He was a very good player, but not much success. And Paul saw that too. The idea that even he kept working as hard as he could, even though he didn't have this huge success. So it was really what it was. But the inspiration. It was. His mom gave him the confidence. She always said, you can do anything, Paul.
I was going to ask about that.
But his father was the one who said, you've got to never think you've mastered the music. And even the other night at the Hollywood Bowl, he's done The Boy in the Bubble for 20 years.
Yeah.
Okay, I go to the rehearsal. He's on stage. The sound checks are 2 hours.
Yeah,
okay?
I've
Some
heard,
artists don't even have a sound check, but he's there for 2 hours.
Reworking these songs.
Well, the band calls it the matinee. Okay, and I've got a better way to do this part of Boy in the Bubble. After 20 years, he's still doing that. You know,
35. Actually, 30 years.
Oh my God! Yeah. But I'd be sitting in the dressing room watching television or something, or reading, or having a glass of wine.
Yeah, you can do this in your sleep, Paul. You can do it in your sleep.
But that's it. You know, I've been in the studio with him where he'll say he'll give me a line of a song, and here's 5 different ways I've done it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which one sounds the best? I'll say, well, I can't tell the difference. They sound exactly the same to me. No, listen again. See, he's got this fine-tuning process in his brain where he can tell that. You know, that's one. But that's part of the quality control he's got. Paul McCartney, bless him, has put out a lot of weak albums, okay? And then one time I interviewed Paul, and I said, Paul, very gently, I said, why do you put so many albums out? Why don't you take the best of the songs and maybe put out half as many albums? Oh, no. I never can judge my music. That's up to the public can do. I didn't think yesterday was any good. Look what happens and so forth. That's his approach, okay? I just put it out.
Yeah.
Simon, no. I'm going to sit on that record for a year, 2 years, 3 years until I know it's good.
More like a master craftsman.
Yeah, and one great story is he wins the Grammy for Graceland, okay?
Yeah.
Then he makes the Rhythm of the Saints,
Yeah.
which is probably going to win another Grammy. And the record company says, Paul, we need the record right now if we're going to get it out in time to be eligible for the Grammy. He says, I'm not finished with it. I'm not finished with the sequencing of the songs. And he says, that's more important than the Grammy, even though he wanted the Grammy so bad.
That would have been his fourth,
Yes, right.
unprecedented
And-
fourth. Nobody's
And we're
won
only
four,
talking
right.
about 2 weeks.
Wow.
2 weeks. He could have sat down one night easily and said, okay,
here's the sequence of
But,
the
but
song.
he doesn't
Right.
do that. He doesn't let go until it's absolutely perfect in his mind. And he'd be the first person ever to win 4 Grammy Album of the Year awards.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get him out of Queens for his first taste of fame. But before we do, we have to introduce another character here from the life. And like it or not, forever entwined in Simon history is Art Garfunkel. I didn't know that they were a thing in 1957, known as Tom and Jerry. It's so early in the history of rock and roll. It was there at almost the beginning. It's crazy. You know, granted, a one-trick pony with Hey Schoolgirl. That's obviously heavily influenced by the Everly Brothers. So why were they unable to successfully follow up with that?
Well, the funny thing is, I mean, what I love is twists of fate. The Garfunkel. I mean, Simon's born in Newark, New Jersey, right? His family, when he's 2 years old, moves to Kew Gardens Hills, New York.
Right.
2 blocks from a family named Garfunkel.
It's it's like Lennon and McCartney. You know, they were less than a mile apart
Isn't
from
that
each
amazing?
other. I've always wondered how is it that let's for a moment, Lennon and McCartney, probably the greatest songwriting geniuses of the 20th century that will be remembered 500 years from now. How is it that 2 geniuses are a mile apart? Anyway, we could go on forever. But same thing with Simon and Garfunkel.
Okay,
right?
and think of this: Elvis Presley. Sam Phillips wants to open a recording studio called Sun Records and blend country and blues. Okay,
right.
Meet into rock and roll. He opens the studio 6 blocks from where a kid named Elvis Presley lives.
Yeah,
I mean those fates. I mean those are just amazing.
Yeah.
But
anyway, so how they weren't able to follow up Hey Schoolgirl?
Okay, so they make Tom and Jerry, which is a Everly Brothers kind of song.
Yeah,
it gets to number 49 or 50 in the country, mainly because of some payola back east. It gets on the radio. And the recording, and again, Paul is the songwriter, remember? And so he brings some more songs to the owner of Big Records, which is a little tiny label named Big. And he says, here's some more songs for Artie and I to do. Plus, here's some, I guess somehow, he says, well, I don't think this is so much a Simon and Garfunkel or a Tom and Jerry song. It sounds more like Elvis here. In fact, why don't you do this as a solo artist, Paul? Okay. He's excited about being in the music business. He's still going to do more Tom and Jerry records, but they don't tell Garfunkel. And Garfunkel feels betrayed. He feels like he's forgotten about me. He's abandoning me. In fact, this was probably the most fascinating.
Wow, something that's happened several times in
the
decades.
See, they never healed that resentment that Art had, and the fear that he was going to be dumped again. And here's the most single and amazing thing, and I think I came across in the whole time of researching the book. I found an unpublished interview Paul's mom did back in the 90s. And back in that time of Tom and Jerry, they were 16, 17 years old.
Right.
Art's father, seeing what's going on, that Paul writes the songs, tries to get Paul's father to sign a contract saying Paul, for the rest of his life, will only sing and record with Art Garfunkel. Isn't that, I mean, how can you do that at 16 years old?
Yeah.
And Paul's father says, no, I'm not going to sign that. He might want to do something different someday. Now,
Thankfully.
But isn't that one of the great things?
Yeah.
And it's been hidden for all these years in that unpublished interview she did.
That's crazy. So Tom and Jerry split up.
For 5 years, they don't talk to each other.
Yeah. Paul continues to pursue music while Garfunkel goes to Columbia to study architecture. Paul does get a degree, an English degree from Queens College. But more importantly, he does many different jobs in the New York recording biz. Would it be fair to say that at that point, Paul leapfrogs Garfunkel musically by gaining the proverbial 10,000 hours?
No, because he spent 5 years trying to write songs, all copied off the radio, just like Hey Schoolgirl was. Hey Schoolgirl is not a good song. He's copying what's on the radio. There's no imagination in any of those songs. He's recording demos for other artists. And in fact, he was doing things so terrible as one of the songs he recorded, there was a hit in the 50s called I Want to Be the Lipstick on Your Collar. Connie Francis. So the song Paul records, I Want to Be the Lipstick on Your Lips. Now, is there anything cornier than that? No. But he spent 5 years doing that stuff. Right. And Simon fans for years have been trying to find all of those great demos and those great recordings and stuff. And I've got a 3-disc set of maybe 50 of them, and there's not 1 minute in any
that you
of
go,
that.
There's genius.
Yeah, you wouldn't think genius. You wouldn't think that guy's even worth listening to. It was just unbelievably, but he was learning how to work in a recording studio. That was the one benefit of all that stuff. Right. But still, he was going nowhere.
He's not progressing at all.
No, not as a songwriter. No, I just don't understand it. He doesn't understand it. But he was, and finally he gets discouraged. He's saying, I'm not going anywhere. This stuff isn't any good. Elvis was in the army. Chuck Berry was in jail. But it was Bobby Vinton. They were making records. I don't know if I want to be part of this pop music anymore.
Yeah.
And he says he sees folk music and Joan Baez and Bob Dylan. Right. Oh my God, he hears Bob Dylan.
Greenwich, right.
Because he first started listening to Joan Baez, but he didn't like all those folk songs. I'm going down to the river and stab my baby, all those English songs. But he heard Bob Dylan. Now, Bob Dylan's talking about his life. That's what I want to do in my music. I want to have something really unique and deep down, and that was the turning point.
Right. So we have to talk about the breakthrough hit, Sound of Silence. But it's the second version that takes off when all seems lost. I think it's fair to say without Uber producer Tom Wilson, Simon and Garfunkel might have remained in obscurity.
Well, the thing, if I could inject something though, because the essential thing to know is he's trying to be like Bob Dylan, but he's not Bob Dylan. He's writing corny songs still. He's still writing corny folk songs. But John F. Kennedy died.
Even Bob Dylan saw him live once down at Gertie's, right? At Gertie's in Greenwich.
What about it?
Bob Dylan saw him once play?
Oh yeah, that was Folk City later.
Yeah. Folk City.
But he can't. He's not doing anything. How come I can't do something better, more original, something on my own? And John F. Kennedy dies. He sits in his room for 2 days.
November 22nd, 1963.
Yeah, so he sits in his room for 2 days crying, moping, despondent. He finally gets up, goes into the family bathroom. It's dark in there. He always goes in there to try to write songs. He turns the water on to hear the tile echo like a recording studio. He sits there for days trying to come up with something that's interesting. And he finally says, "Hello, darkness. The darkness is the room. Yeah. The darkness is the world. The darkness is his feeling." So it took that pain of the Kennedy assassination to enable him to dig down deep and write a great song. And once he wrote a great song, he never stopped. He applied all the stuff his father told him. You keep getting better. You keep getting better. You don't look at the trends and so forth. You keep going forward.
Right. So from there, they all of a sudden hit it big. I know now.
Oh, you asked about Tom Wilson.
Yeah.
And that's right. They made the first record. And the funny thing is what's important is Paul goes to England while Art's going to Columbia, and he starts writing. He's a solo artist playing in these little clubs. And he writes Homeward Bound. He writes I'm a Rock. He writes those songs over there.
Yeah.
He comes back. He goes to Columbia Records to Tom Wilson and says, I'd like to try to get a recording contract here. And Tom Wilson says, well, I'm sorry, Paul, but we've already got Bob Dylan. We don't need another
Bob
songwriter.
Dylan. Right.
We don't need another solo songwriter. And he says, wait, I have a friend who we've sung together. What if I go get him and bring him in? Because he was looking for a group, see? So he goes and gets Garfunkel. That's how they reunited. So he never went to Columbia Records to be Simon and Garfunkel. It was to be Paul Simon.
Right.
So he brings Garfunkel in, and he plays The Sound of Silence.
With that harmony magic.
Oh, you kidding? And so, yes, we'll sign you immediately. But the record was a flop. The album was a flop.
Yeah.
So less than
he goes back to England.
11,000 copies. He goes back to England and keeps working on, and while he's there, while he's gone, someone gives Tom Wilson the idea to redo Sound of Silence because the Mr. Tambourine Man was just a hit.
Oh,
let me do it in that style, that 12-string guitar.
Yeah.
So he redoes it without Simon and Garfunkel even knowing about it. They put it out. It starts going up the chart. Paul gets a phone call, come home, you're a star.
That's crazy. And then now we have Simon and Garfunkel. So throughout the 60s, the duo achieves tremendous fame and cultural significance, certainly with the Graduate soundtrack. And then Bridge Over Troubled Water, an even bigger hit. But then at their height, they break up. This kind of ends the first part of Paul Simon's career. So what would you say about the takeaway of the original Simon and Garfunkel?
Well, there were a lot of good times they had. Now, we all talk now about how far apart they are, but they was great. They had fun on the road. They make jokes. They had the same sense of humor. There were some great times, but there were also undercurrents going all the way back to Hey Schoolgirl. Remember, Art's always thinking he's only a step away from Simon could decide to leave again. And so the question is, why did Simon decide to leave again? There have been all kinds of stories told over the years, ego conflicts, jealousy. Art goes off to make a movie. Paul's sitting in New York waiting for him to come back for 6 months. He's frustrated. But my thesis in the book, Christian, is all that stuff collectively wasn't the reason he left. The reason Paul left was going back to his father, being better at what you're doing. He thought he had taken Simon and Garfunkel as far as they could go. He didn't want to sit around and go downhill. So he walks away from all that security, commercial success and stuff. And after Clive Davis, the head of Columbia, said, it's the biggest mistake you're ever going to make, walking away from Garfunkel. He says, okay, this is the only way the music can survive. And look at what he did.
Oh, yeah.
He said, someday I hope people will look back at my music and say, oh, Simon and Garfunkel was the early part, but look at what you've done since. And in the book, I think if you take his songwriting, he wrote, let's say, 5 great songs during the Simon and Garfunkel days. Yeah. He's written 50 since then. I mean, look at that proportion.
Yeah. And there's 3 very distinct periods of Paul's Simon, maybe 4 after Graceland, but Simon and Garfunkel, the 70s, and then obviously in the mid 80s with Graceland. But let's talk about the mid 70s here. So Paul's now has the freedom to explore musically, and in 1972, his first solo record, he does. And 2 songs really stand out for me there, and that's Mother and Child Reunion and Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard. It's kind of like the beginning of Paul Simon being the godfather of world music, would you say? At least to American ears.
Yeah, I don't think he gets much credit for that. But look, it's those 2 songs are so unique. Still, after all these years, there's still Me and Julio stands out as just totally an island apart from everything else in pop music. And I thought that was a tremendous step when he did that record. But it was the next album where he emerges as just the classic songwriter, American Tune, and Something So Right. Now, if you listen to American Tune today and imagine a 24-year-old writing that song about the country's problems, he would be considered the new Dylan, the new Paul Simon, the new everything else. Yeah. And writing that song 50 years ago and have it last that long, I mean, that's when I think that was the moment that it was clear that Paul Simon was going to be here for the long run, that he was able to get that level on his own when he wasn't. The first Simon album sells 1 million copies. The record industry, Bridge Over Troubled Water, had sold 6 or 7. The record industry said, "Oh, it's over. He's going downhill."
Right.
He's not selling as much. But he bounced back with that next album, and he didn't sell that much more. But the music was so great. Kodachrome was on that.
Oh,
But
yeah.
American Tune and Something So Right, I think it was just Cole Porter could have not have written a better song than Something So Right, and I don't know who could have written a better song than American Tune.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty amazing material. So, all right, let me switch to the personal for a moment. In the book, you spend some time examining Paul Simon's closest relationships. We talked a little bit about Art Garfunkel, but 3 in particular, and they all fail in one respect. And the 2 marriages, one with Peggy Harper and Carrie Fisher. So, why do you think? Well, first, the fact is that even though he has this tumultuous life, the muse never seems to leave him. It's almost like the grist that's needed to make great art.
Well, I think you find with Dylan, Neil Young, John Lennon, at early days, artistry is difficult. And you have to almost be obsessive. That has to be above everything else, which means your relationships are going to suffer, your friendships are going to suffer. Everything in your life is secondary to that music. Mm-hmm. And that's what Paul spent that whole 70s. He was unhappy. He says, why am I unhappy? I have all this success, and I love writing songs. And he said, maybe I should get married. My parents were very happy. Maybe I'll get married. That'll make me happy. So he marries Peggy Harper.
Right.
And he didn't give her a chance. He was still always in the studio. It didn't work out. He wasn't happy. He was lonelier than ever, And then he meets Carrie Fisher. Well, she's in show business. Maybe that'll work out better. But he's still obsessed with that music. So that never had a chance. And it wasn't until he meets Edie Brickell much later.
In the later 80s.
He's ready to open up and have more balance in his life. He's able to give the relationship a chance. The first 2 relationships, I talked to Peggy and I talked to Carrie, and they were just great people. They're so much fun, but it just he couldn't fit him into his life. There wasn't room for him. And Carrie especially was so different. She loved publicity. He wanted privacy. She wanted the West Coast. He wanted the East Coast. She wanted to go out all the time. He wanted to stay and write in his music, and her addiction problems. So all those things hurt that relationship. And he didn't think he was ever going to find, and he meets Edie Brickell on the Saturday Night Live show.
All right, I have to, since you brought it up, talk a little bit about Saturday Night Live, because, in the mid-'70s, all of a sudden, Paul Simon is hilarious. I mean, I think he's the host of the second Saturday Night Live. And then one instance is famously, he comes out in a turkey suit to sing The Sound of Silence, or is it Bridge Over Troubled Water? One of the two. Yeah. But it's crazy. But then all of a sudden you see, oh my God, this guy's hilarious, And I know one of his best friends is Lorne Michaels, so that's.
It wasn't unintentional that he comes out in a turkey suit and he plays basketball with a 6'11" guy.
That's right.
He hated the fact that people thought he didn't have humor. So Lorne Michaels he becomes his best friend because of the humor and stuff. And he says, come on the show. And Paul loves the idea of going on and having the fun. But even that, I don't think really made people think, well, he's doing that, but he's still this serious guy he's sad, serious guy from Simon and Garfunkel, because his face when you see him away from the stage, it's kind of dour. It doesn't look like he's happy and stuff, And he tends to be reserved and shy. He's not really outgoing. So I think that image continues to haunt him despite the Saturday Night Live stuff. Although if you were perceptive enough, you would have seen this guy's got especially because he came up with the ideas for those things.
Yeah. He was in the writers' room,
he brings up the
writing
idea.
with Belushi and Aykroyd and Chevy Chase and all that. Yeah,
I'm thinking when I see him in the turkey, how did anyone talk him into doing that?
No. It was him who said, I'll do it. Yeah, that's great. That's just crazy. All right. So in the mid-'80s, Paul Simon reinvents himself once again, this time radically. Of course, I'm pointing to his, unqualified masterpiece, Graceland. It's mostly South African world music, but on a massive pop scale. So Graceland opened so many ears in America to this other music, but it wasn't without controversy. The African National Congress and even Little Steven really hit him hard for not following the cultural exchange ban implemented by the UN. So my first question on this is, what was your reflection at the time that Graceland came out?
Oh, I just loved the record, you know, and I didn't get caught up so much in the controversy about it. I didn't think, I kind of agreed with him that going to South Africa and recording with South African musicians, paying them double scale is not the same as going to Sun City and getting $1 million to play. And I talked to Little Steven, who I've known for years. I respect him so much. And I read the things that I read about the controversy, but it really was more of a controversy in England. Billy Bragg and Paul Weller, those artists were really, really critical of him, and so I read it, but I never adopted, rightly or wrongly, the idea that was more important than the music. The music itself was so great. I thought taking South African music and superimposing the American pop music tradition on top of it, you know. And I think, here's my prediction, we'll see 50 years from now, I think that album, more than any album Bob Dylan made, will be remembered as the masterpiece.
More than Blonde on Blonde and Blood on the Tracks?
Yes, because the world's going to get smaller and countries are going to be borrowing from each other musically, and that's going to be the framework, you know. That's why I think that album, I'm not saying it's a better album, but I think that'll be more influential. Right. That could open the door for musicians around the world of how you can be daring and do that, because you got to remember, one of the funny things is, Christian, when he does that, he's at the bottom of his career. One Trick Pony.
Yeah, One Trick Pony movie.
Big failure. He was embarrassed. It was a terrible ego thing on his own part. He thought he could, I won the Grammy for Still Crazy, I can do anything. Well, he can't. He couldn't write and star in a movie. Then Hearts and Bones, the next album, is a big commercial failure, okay? Yeah. Then Carrie Fisher divorces him. So all his career and his personal life have all collapsed. Plus, he picks up a copy of Billboard magazine. And the issue says, we're looking for new voices in pop music. And one DJ says in particular, a radio programmer, we're not going to play people like Paul Simon anymore. So he's saying...
well, wait a minute. What does that mean?
That's right. And so what do I do now? And for weeks he was depressed. He sat around. He would listen to tapes kind of in vague background, but he heard this tape of South African music and he kept going back to it. It took him days before he realized he was going back to it. And, wow, that sounds exciting. But that wasn't a career strategy, because it was the worst thing you could do. American pop fans do not buy foreign sounds. Think of how few records in the last 50 years. Now, they do in England, they do in Japan, they do in France. They're open to world music. But in America,
very insular.
So the fact that he goes there, you can imagine Warner Brothers, oh my God, what's he doing? Going to South Africa? He's making a record like that? He comes back, he makes this record. It takes months and months to edit those tracks from South Africa, turn them into songs. Yeah. And so then he brings it to Warner Brothers.
And that was Roy Halley that he worked with.
Roy Halley, great producer.
Yeah.
And so in fact, he was so important, that engineer to Simon and Garfunkel. It was called, in the industry, it was called Simon, Garfunkel and Halley. But he brings the music in to play to the sales staff at Warner Brothers. And Roy Halley tells me the story. They were sitting around. They wanted a new Madonna record. They wanted a new Prince record. What in the hell is this stuff he's playing? And everyone was rolling their eyes. And at the end of the meeting, Lenny Warnaker, the head of the label, says, "That's a great record." Everybody in the room says yes.
The boss thinks it's great.
They start great. That's what people do. They're following, you know. And thank God for Lenny, because he. But look what
that's an old record, man.
And look what was the first single they picked, because they wanted to keep away from the world music aspect.
Oh, they did. You can call me out,
which is does not sound South African.
But not to mention a video to go along with it, which became a staple
Well, see,
on
the
MTV.
record comes out. It was not a success. And then they make the video. The video goes on MTV. Then people say, well, that's great. I want to get that album. And it was the video that made the album go from like 195 to 11 to 2 to 1, in a period of whatever it was in 3 or 4 weeks. But before that, they all thought they had another failure.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. So, you brought up the One Trick Pony, a couple of the failures, and I don't mean this to be negative, because through failure comes understanding. But I got to ask, when he tries these new territories like film or Broadway with The Cape Man, why I'm not sure why he doesn't apply the same lessons from earlier in his career, where he says, "Oh, I need to go and hone these skills to then control the situation after the fact."
Well, look, he's had all this success. And in the studio with Simon and Garfunkel and Simon, he was spending all his time protecting his music against outside influences, things that would alter his vision. When he goes to Hollywood, he wants to protect his vision again. He wants to keep out the directors and all these people who might change the vision. Now, that's a mistake he made, but in his own mind, I don't want a big-name producer coming in here and changing this movie from what I want, okay? Afterwards, he was egotistical, he was overconfident, he made a terrible mistake in not getting a writer, not getting a director, and he admits all that. Okay.
But he does it again
Okay,
at Broadway.
That is exactly right. But that's something. It's an ingrained thing to protect your artistry. Now, the difference in Broadway is the music itself was brilliant. Okay, it was the play that was bad because again, he didn't hire a big name director. Okay. He co-wrote it with Derek Walcott, a producer a Nobel Prize winning poet, which is not a playwright. Yeah. That was a mistake. And at the end, he admits again, I made the mistake again. I should have got a director. So that it's ingrained so much to protect himself. It's just a human flaw. It's a serious flaw that he has, that he couldn't trust a director to come in, And I think if he made another Broadway musical now, he's thinking, maybe I should write another musical now. Maybe so, but you better hire a director and a writer and so forth.
Well, after seeing the show Wednesday night, I've got an idea, and he should follow what Bruce Springsteen is doing on Broadway.
Yeah, that's interesting.
An intimate sort of thing. One of my favorite pieces of the night was when he grabbed the string quartet.
Wasn't that beautiful?
And it's just him directing. That was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, beautiful.
I had tears. It was
wow. That's great.
Amazing.
Somebody else told me the same thing. They had tears in that part, but it was gorgeous, And I love the song. And he's working on an album now that'll come out in the fall, I think. Which is where he takes 10 of his favorite songs that were never hits.
Right.
And
I've heard this.
Redoes them. And
now that's sort of looking back a little bit.
Well, the idea is, here's the idea. A lot of Paul Simon. Most people have hits. The great artists have hits that go into the cultural consciousness. I'm not sure there's any great songs that are more in the cultural consciousness from any writer than Simon. Okay, the Beatles, but I Want to Hold Your Hand. Those aren't great songs. You could talk about Hey Jude, Eleanor Rigby. Those are great songs. Imagine. But Simon's got 30 of those. Okay, I mean, if you go Me and Julio, if you took just the songs he wrote in the
I had 28 in my Spotify list of top 10, but they're all culturally relevant.
Exactly. And so he says, there were some other songs. I would love to get a couple more songs in that list. So I'm going to take the songs I've already done.
Very competitive.
I'm going to take some other songs I've already done because I think they deserve to be there. I think Darling Lorraine is as good as blah, 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 whatever song, Obvious Child. And so he's trying to redo them in a different way. And that's his goal, is to get a couple more.
To listen to.
And one of my favorite things in the book is how he talks about his songwriting process. The idea that if you and I were sitting down to write a song, I would think the first thing we need to do is think of a theme. What are we going to write about?
Right.
Okay. He doesn't do that. He sits down and starts playing music. He starts playing guitar or piano until something he plays is evocative to him. See, that's why he's always searching for new sounds. Latin music, South African music, Eastern African music, electronic music, because he's always trying to find a sound that will evoke something. He doesn't want to go back and do folk songs. He doesn't want to go back. He wants to keep moving. And once he finds something evocative, whether it was Sound of Silence or Graceland, he'll say, well, what is that making me feel? How can I put into words what music is saying?
Says.
And so he goes line by line. He doesn't come up with an idea of what the song's about. He'll go one line and look at it and say, well, what does that make me think? And in that process, he'll discover the theme. And that's what's amazing. That's the way Fellini made films. Fellini used to say, you can never make a great film by taking a book and adapting it, because you're limited by the imagination of the book writer.
Right.
But when you're just letting your self-consciousness discover the theme, he said there were certain lines he would come up with, like in Graceland. Losing love is like a window to your heart. Everybody can see how you're blown apart. He said when he came up with that line, he sat down in the bed. It took the breath out of him because it was so personal. So personal, you know. So that's what the kind of unique thing about the songwriting that he does. That I think if a songwriter reads the book, that's an interesting thing. I don't know if many people can write that way. I would think, again, you and I would sit down and let's write it. We had a bad day yesterday. Let's talk about our troubles. Then we try to figure out some way to say that.
And make it rhyme, right. There. So near the end of the book, to follow with this line of thinking here, is Simon is publicly announcing now his possible retirement from touring, but we'll take that with a grain of salt.
Well, I don't think he's the Eagles. I don't think he's Cher. I think he's going to. You got to see what he's not retiring.
He's
stopping. There's
touring,
no more big tours. He'll do an occasional live show that's a benefit. But he's not going to tour anymore.
Or maybe that Broadway idea I have.
That's right. That's right. That's not a tour. He might perform again somehow, but it won't be a traditional tour. It'll usually be for a benefit. He might write a musical. He might write a new song. He might make another album. He's not retiring. He's just touring is gone.
So his friend Chuck Close is rather aghast at this and tries to dissuade him. He then says, and I quote from your book, "Talent is a dime a dozen, but some of the most talented people never accomplish anything. Sometimes the person with far less talent outperforms the talented person because he's hungrier. He wants more." Doesn't that say a lot about the character of Paul Simon?
Yeah. But I think he's got the fallacy with that is, because I would repeat that line Chuck said, and I believe it. But the fallacy you got to remember, if you're a songwriter wanting to be Paul Simon, he had a lot of great talent to begin with. You're not like coming with no talent and say, I'm going to work hard and become a great songwriter. Okay.
But as we discussed earlier, that pre Tom and Jerry, pre Simon and Garfunkel, post Tom and Jerry period, there's all these songs and they're all horrible and they never get better. So.
Okay, but
wouldn't it the talented person?
Let's say you and I again. We want to write songs.
Right.
We go through 5 years of writing terrible songs. Then we say, Christian, let's get better. Okay, we sit down. We go in the bathroom. We turn off the lights.
John F. Kennedy or whoever dies.
We turn the water on. Something bad happens in the news. But what if it doesn't come? That song. What if we have nothing inside to say?
Yeah.
That's what's the mystery. See?
I
That's
think
what the
everybody
mystery.
has something
No
to say.
way. No way. I tell you, there's 1 in 1,000,000 that can be a Paul Simon or Bob Dylan.
Well,
and so
that's obvious.
That's because there's not that artistic edge, and there's nothing they have that deep to say. You got to have those two things hand in hand, because otherwise, why wouldn't the charts be full of people? Who can you name today? Jason Isbell's a great writer today. There's very few people.
Today.
Father John Misty's a good. But songwriting is gone. It's all spectacle, and
maybe we're just in a moment, and maybe
so. But look at how unique rock and roll was.
It was
50 years. Look at swing.
Yeah.
Look at swing. Was anything bigger than swing? 3 years.
No. Yeah.
3 years.
50 plus years.
And you think about this also. If Bob Dylan hadn't come along, where would rock and roll have gone? Because there was not a lot.
It was all with Teeny Bopper.
It was fun. It was rebellion.
It
had
girls and cars.
Had a great challenge. Elvis Presley and Chuck Berry had this great challenge, but few people could live up to that. And then Dylan comes along, and I would have been. I grew up right in the 50s, and I would have been tired of it by the time I was in college. When the Beatles first come along, I say, well, that's kind of cute, but all they're doing is what Carl Perkins did.
Yeah,
I didn't see
Chuck
anything
Berry,
great in that. But Dylan puts art, imagination, and thought into that energy. Yeah. And then the Beatles see that, and Simon sees that, and Bruce Springsteen sees that, and Bono sees that, and Tom Petty sees that. So it was that thought that was put on. And after a while, maybe that's what more can you say with rock and roll? Just as Paul Simon ran out of chords after Bridge Over Water, maybe rock and roll has run out of those things. Maybe you got to find a new form, maybe electronic dance music. But
we say it's this came about because of a combination of the music, technology, and the culture all coming together. You know, I mean, the American century really is about the latter half of the 20th century. Rock and roll is an American art form, and the technology arrives to mass produce it and put it in everybody's homes.
But I can't underline any more the fact if you and I try to sit down and write The Sound of Silence,
it ain't gonna happen.
And a million other people and 10 million other people, it's not going to happen. You've got to have that unique talent. But the thing is, you've got to find it in yourself. Yeah. And a lot of songwriters never go that deep to find it. They might have it there, but they don't. They settle for things. Once it's a success, well, I'll try to keep working with the same framework. Like Bruce Springsteen, that's one of the great things Bruce said one time. As a songwriter, every time you've got to take another layer of skin off to get deeper inside. And a lot of people, I've had artists talk to me, I don't want to get that deeper inside. It's hard. I just want to make songs, lighter songs and have hit records. It's really unique that I've seen somebody get as deep as John Lennon, Bob Dylan, Paul Simon, Bruce Springsteen. I think Bono comes close to that sometimes. But it's very, and there are other artists, Stevie Wonder, but that's very hard to get to that level of and then when you dig down there, some people just don't have it.
Right. All right. So after researching and writing the book, if the Nobel Prize Committee was to award a second songwriter the award for literature, do you think Paul Simon should be a candidate?
Yeah, well, of course, a candidate. Yeah, I think the body of work is just unique. Okay, I think there are other great songs: Randy Newman, Joni Mitchell, Springsteen, and Springsteen might be a candidate for it. But I think that body of work, I don't think anybody can match that. Going from Sound of Silence to Questions for the Angels. Questions for the Angels is just a fantastic song, though. It's about the culture and environmental issues, and it's like him being a parent and a citizen. It's how he feels at this age in his life, and it's got this one verse in it is as good as anything he's ever written, or as good a thing as I've heard in years. If everybody in the world died and all the buildings collapsed, would a zebra on the plains of Africa shed a single zebra tear? Oh, I mean, but you're trying to say something about the world and the planet and interdependence. How can you say something as gentle as that? You're not protesting.
No, you're not hammering over the head.
That's
right.
it. It's saying a sweet, warm thing. And that's always, if you look through Paul's music, Bridge Over Troubled Water, Mrs. Robinson, Graceland, the best song, still crazy after all these years, there's that empathy, there's that caring about people, and I think that's what brings people to Simon's music. But it's not as dramatic as Dylan and Springsteen. Yeah. So people don't feel it as much. It's music that you. One person said Simon is everyone's second best favorite songwriter, because they think more of the other people because they know their life story. They know what they're like and they can identify with it and stuff. Paul just says, "Here's my music." He doesn't share the life story. That's what I hope I got to a little bit in the book.
I think you did. So, last question. So it's looking like you've got a collection going here. So whose life next?
Yeah, that's the one question I haven't been able to deal with. I've got my original list of 7, but it's very hard. You've got to find somebody that you want to spend 2 or 3 years writing about. That's very hard because you got to be interested in it. You don't want to be bored wandering around.
It's like having a second marriage for a while.
No, it really is, because a publisher offered me a fortune to write a biography of Prince. Okay, and I like Prince, but I don't know people around Prince. You'd have to be knocking at his door, trying to get people to talk to you, and I don't know if I want to spend 2 or 3 years struggling like that to do it.
A good candidate, but maybe
but soon. He wouldn't be in my top list though. But Stevie Wonder I think is tremendous. But he goes in his own time so much. When I did interviews back in the day, he'd always be 3 hours late, and then he talks in a kind of a spiritual, vague way that makes you. If you ask him, and I love Stevie Wonder, you ask him what day it is, he'll take him an hour and a half to tell you that it's Friday. So that's probably impossible. I think that'll be a great book someday, though, for somebody to actually tackle that project. So I'm working on 2 or 3 other 4 things. Not very many. You'd be surprised, because I don't think many people measure up to that, and you can get through to them to make an intelligent book. So I'll tell you as soon as I know. But
we can't wait to hear.
Yeah.
Robert Hilburn, it's been fantastic having you with us here at Deeper Digs in Rock. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christian. Thank you very, very much.
say she's crazy, she got diamonds on the soles of her shoes. Well, that's one way to lose these walking blues. Diamonds on the soles of your shoes. She was physically forgotten, but then she slipped into my pocket with my car keys. She said, you've taken me for granted because I please you, wearing these diamonds.
All right, let's hear it for Robert Hilburn. Wow, great discussion. Please, tell us what you think. I want to say this, here at the RNRA, this was a dream interview for us, truly. So, as I said up top, we were thrilled. As music fans growing up in L.A., we knew Hilburn. You might love him, you might hate him, but you sure as hell read him. And we cannot wait to sit down with him again in the future. Okay, before we leave, a few notes on our subject today, the great Paul Simon. While I was doing the research, I counted them up. According to Billboard.com, between his solo work and Simon & Garfunkel, Paul Simon wrote 28 top 40 hit songs. 14 are in the top 10, and 4 come in at number 1. An incredible feat in the rock and roll pantheon. This is Lennon and McCartney territory. And remember, they were a team. Paul Simon was just one guy. Add to this the global impact of Graceland, both at its release and that the impact is still being felt 30 years on. Hilburn is right in saying this piece of work will still be relevant long into the future. I think we can bank on it. We wish Paul well on the rest of his last tour. We just hope he takes us up on our suggestion and goes back to Broadway for a long-term residency gig right there in his beloved hometown. Come on, he's not really going to stop playing, but we get why being on the road is weary, even if the accommodations are far superior than a Greyhound from Pittsburgh. I'm Christian Swain, and this has been Deeper Digs in Rock, a production of Rock N Roll Archaeology. If they can't spell it, educate a friend. Keep up the rockin'.
I met my old lover on the street last night. She seemed so glad to see me, I just smiled. And we talked about some old times, and we drank ourselves some beers. Still crazy after all these years. Oh, still crazy after all these years.
Deeper Digs in Rock, produced and hosted by Christian Swain. All sound design and incidental music by Busy Signal Studios. All quotes performed by actors unless noted. Playlists can be found at iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. Please purchase these great and important tracks. All songs, clips, and references can be found on our show notes. Please visit rnrap.com for more information.